The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the cruel mass murder of 4 University of Idaho students. A case where we are finally getting access to some of the public records and public evidence that is giving insight into this monster. Here's the story. In the stillness of a cold Idaho night, 4 University of Idaho students were slaughtered in their off-campus home. Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Their killer moved like a shadow through the house, leaving behind a trail of horror and shattered lives. He was caught because of his mistakes. DNA on the knife sheath left behind, surveillance video of his car, and a digital trail that did not add up to an alibi. Facing the death penalty, he folded in fear and pleaded guilty, accepting life behind bars, a generous gift given to him by prosecutors who had overwhelming evidence of guilt. But the lingering question of why has never been answered. What led him to commit this horrific crime? What was he motivated by? And we've been getting some bits and pieces of more information about this killer. More information from the investigation, including this from the Independent, who spoke with Heather Barnhart, who was the director of forensic research at Cellbrite, who took a look at the cell phone data of BK. She went through the phone. He didn't just Google these cases, she said. He downloaded full PDFs of case files, not once, but repeatedly. He was downloading detailed reports on serial killers, including Danny Rowling, who also murdered college students using a similar knife. This wasn't casual browsing. This was meticulous research, she added. So once we heard that name, once I heard it, I had one big question, and it's our first question of our investigation tonight. Who is Danny Rowling? What do we know about this guy? If BK was interested in downloading information and researching this guy, I want to know who he is in the background. Here to help answer that question tonight is the Deputy Editorial Director at People Magazine, Jeremy Helliger, and he worked at the University of Florida student newspaper during these cases and killings, and his roommate knew some of the victims of Rowling. Also with us, Rod Smith, who was the prosecutor in the Gainesville Ripper trial. He's also a former state attorney for the 8th Judicial Circuit of Florida. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. What I want to do before we hear from you, and I want to hear a lot from you, Cody Thomas, Court TV field reporter, went back into the Court TV archives because we covered this case to take a look at and learn a little bit more about Danny Rowling.
I'm just a human being like anybody else. I mean, we're all capable of terrible mistakes and being led astray from a path, from a good path. I once was on a good path.
That was a jailhouse interview from Danny Rowling, otherwise known as the Gainesville Ripper. In August of 1990, Rowling sent a shockwave of fear through the community in Gainesville, Florida, home of the University of Florida, when he brutally murdered 5 students, 4 from UF, and 1 student who attended Santa Fe College.
Even though the murderers' victims at that point seemed to be college co-eds, as a matter of fact, that did not make the community feel any better. So we had a lot of people that, I forgot how many thousands of calls. We had the Gainesville Police Department, please come by their home and check out their back door, check out their yard. It was literally more calls than we could handle.
In total, there were 4 female victims and 1 male victim. Freshmen Sonia Larson and Christina Powell were roommates at UF, as well as students Tracy Paulus and Manny Taboda, who also lived together. Krista Hoyt went to Santa Fe College. Reports state some of the female victims were raped and mutilated before being stabbed to death. He even decapitated one of his victims and posed some of them in sexually provocative positions before leaving the scene. An inmate held in jail with Rowling testified during his 1994 trial about things Rowling had told him behind bars.
He said he had entered the apartment. He said he discovered one girl sleeping on a couch. And he noticed some stairs leading, looked like up to another room. He followed those stairs, and he came upon another girl sleeping in a bed. He said he had to make a decision there on which girl he was going to rape. He said he had to kill one outright. And he made a decision there and killed the girl in the bed upstairs sleeping.
Did he tell you how he killed her?
He stabbed her through the back with a knife.
Did he tell you what kind of weapon in specific he used?
Yes, sir.
What was it?
It's a Marine issue K-bar.
Did you ever have any conversations with him about why he used that weapon?
Yes, sir.
What did he tell you?
He said that knife, K-bar, was a killing knife. So that's what it was made for, designed for.
But Rowling was not immediately on Florida police's radar. It wasn't until they received a tip from Rowling's hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, about a previous 1989 triple murder that investigators began to look closer into Rowling himself. Similarities in the way those victims were killed, their post-mortem treatment, and DNA evidence all led back to the Gainesville Ripper.
I think we drew something like 1,000 to 1,500 samples of blood during that time. We found in the Marion County jail, which is the county just to the south of Gainesville, only about 30 miles away in Ocala. We found an individual in jail there that was from Shreveport, Louisiana. His name was Danny Rowling, and he voluntarily gave us blood and pubic hair. The fact he was from Shreveport and had placed himself, just from what he had told the initial investigation, he placed himself in around Gainesville at that time. That was enough, particularly since he was from Shreveport, Louisiana, to want us to look at him.
Rowling was eventually taken to trial and charged with the 5 Gainesville murders, along with the 3 murders back in Louisiana. And after several court proceedings, he confessed to all 8 killings.
What we're asking is that you render a verdict to Judge Morse that puts Mr. Rowling in a cell. You close the door, you take the key, you lock it, and you throw the key away. That's what we're asking for. That's the basis for our mitigation. That's the end result of what we hope to accomplish by our mitigation. All we're asking you to do is to let the Almighty determine when it is appropriate for Mr. Rowling to die.
Those defense efforts were denied as Danny Rowling was eventually convicted in 1994 and sentenced to death for the 5 gruesome Florida killings. But even then, the victims' loved ones still struggled with the outcome.
It's not over. It will never be over for us. Mom said that until she's 6 feet under, that's when it'll be over for her. And I have to say that I think that that's how I feel about it.
Danny Rowling was executed by lethal injection in a Florida state prison in 2006 at the age of 52. In a jailhouse interview before his execution, he expressed shame for his actions and pointed the finger at his troubled upbringing and loss of faith as the source of those actions.
Because it was ingrained into me when I was a child. Home was not the place I wanted to be. It was the place I wanted to be as far away from as I could, but I was a kid. So I started walking the streets at night. And the night sort of like accepted me. It was like a friend. It was like an entity. It was like, it wasn't just the sun went down and the moon came up.
Okay, wow. Jeremy, I'll begin with you. Working at the Florida Student newspaper during all of this, if people ask you, who was Danny Rowling? How do you answer that question?
He was a monster. And the thing that made him so terrifying is, unlike Kohberger, where you look for a motive, why did he commit these heinous murders? with Danny Rowling, there really was no rhyme or reason. It just felt, even at the time, it felt like the murders were so random and anyone could be his next victim. And the fact that it was stretched out over several days, it just made you feel like you were a target waiting to be attacked. And I think that's what made it such a terrifying time to be a young student in Gainesville.
Rod, you ended up being able to get this guy onto death row. He paid the ultimate penalty for the ultimate crime. Who was Danny Rowling?
Danny Rowling was a classic psychopath. As you already noted, he had killed 3 in a brutal murder in Shreveport before he ever came here. We later determined, over a course of time, determined he'd also been a serial rapist in several states. Rowling, I mean, I've said this so many times in the past, he did it because he enjoyed it. He loved it. He loved the power of it. If Danny Rowling were out for one more day, he would do it again. It was what drove him. The way he would describe in such detail, and even tried to market, as you know, some articles in which he described in great detail the horrific acts that he perpetrated. He not only loved doing it, he loved reliving it. He told several, well, at least 2 that I remember specifically, inmates, he described in great detail what he had done. And it described kind of the sexual power that it gave him. And I mean, one of the most startling moments in the trial was probably when one of his fellow inmates, Rusty Benstead, it was suggested that Danny was exaggerating his sexual contact and the way that he had contact with one of the victims. And Rowling's response had been, you know, when they think they might live, they'll do anything. And for me, Danny Rowling will always be kind of that nightmare that recurs. Every time I hear, as I just heard some of those voices of the family, I remember them as I hear some of this. And I remember trying the case on Court TV that many years ago. I still, from time to time, I still think about him, and it's just a profound sadness of what he did to such young lives. And think where they'd be today. They would be parents and possibly grandparents. They were graduating or just entering the University of Florida. Their children or grandchildren would be doing that. He was a monster. But the thing that was so amazing about Rowling was how he would come up with these excuses of these other personalities, or this kind of, that somehow he was a victim of his home life. He was of course, he shot his father in the head with a pistol, which should tell you something about him. Rowling was a monster. From time to time, those guys come along, and the randomness that your guest just talked about. Actually, that night, he had previously gotten ready. He was just about to pounce on another victim. We still will never know who that was, when someone came around the back door drinking and kind of bumped into him, and he ran off into the woods and ended up over where Sonia was, and the Powells and Larson were living, and that began the spree that went over as I was thinking about this sitting here, I guess next week will be, sadly, the anniversary of those deaths. Wow. He was the fun thing about Rowling, he could really change his look. He had this chameleon-like of it. He would kind of come into the courtroom sometimes looking kind of meek and mild, like he was just, very, and yet we know that the way he presented was anything but that. He was in control, and he was a monster, and it wasn't enough for him to kill. He kept them alive, and he tortured them, and their families had to live with that, and those who still remain still live with it, I'm sure.
Evil. All right, our guests are going to stay with us. When we come back, what was the impact of Rowling's crimes?
I was freaked out. I can't believe it happened in my own complex. I can't believe it happened anywhere. My mom called me this morning and told me to come home now.
The Court TV Podcast will return.
He is a hollow vessel, something less than human.
We are done being victims. We are taking back our lives.
We saw inside the courtroom, and we sort of lived it through our coverage of the case, the impact of BK's crimes on that community out in Moscow, Idaho. And you saw and you felt what the families have been through when they gave their victim impact statements. I want you to take a listen now. We go back in time, or no, we're going to go to Idaho. Back in time after the murders, but before BK is caught. Take a listen to what folks were talking about on the campus.
It just hasn't been the same. A lot of people have been really sad. We're all just trying to weather the storm and try and get back into some semblance of happy spirits.
It's kind of like a little ghosty. Everyone's on edge, quiet and stuff. You don't see everyone as talkative, like chatty, as like social as they used to be.
I think of North Idaho as a pretty off-the-map type of place, pretty safe place, very family-friendly, and to have 4 murders and then the guys just running around on the loose is a little unnerving.
There's like a ton of security now, so guys driving around town and there's police everywhere.
Yeah, there were some students that left for Thanksgiving break and never came back and didn't come back. It was that fearful. So tonight we're taking a look at Danny Rowling, who was one of the killers that BK had researched, and they found these searches on his phone, and we're taking a look at his crimes as well, and that brings us to the next question in our investigation, which is about Rowling. What was the impact of Rowling's crimes? Still with us to help with our investigation, Jeremy Helliger and Rod Smith, who was the prosecutor in the Gainesville Ripper trial. Jeremy, you're on campus working at the paper at that moment. Take us back there. What was the immediate impact of these crimes, and what was some of the more long-term impact as you see it?
Well, the feeling that a lot of us students had was a feeling of not being safe. The beginning of the fall semester was always such a joyous, celebratory time of year. And to have something like this happen, it just really puts it into a different focus. And it's almost like a loss of innocence, because when you're that age, when you're in your late teens, early 20s, you kind of think of yourself as invincible. You don't think of your mortality. But when you're hearing about something like this happening in your neighborhood to people who are your age, it makes you think about the fact that, oh my goodness, this can happen to me. And even after the person is caught, even after the initial terror subsides, you're still sort of looking over your shoulder. You're still sort of, turning on lights when you get home, thinking, is someone waiting for me? So it really had a really short-term and long-term mental and emotional effect on a lot of us.
Rod Smith, you prosecuted him. Was there anything positive that was taken away by law enforcement through the investigation and perhaps learning anything here that would help in the future? Was there any sort of silver lining in this horrific case?
Well, I think that certainly one of the things that I was proudest of being part of, we're divided over everything from time to time. I never saw a community come together anymore. And the law enforcement community, it wasn't whether it was the Gainesville Police or the Sheriff's Office or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. It wasn't, it's our turn, it's what we're doing. It was always, what can we do? Great cooperation. It was incredible. I would say that for all of the participants, or for most of the participants at least, it was a great learning experience. I mean, we weren't talking about a case that was solved overnight. It was a long time before we were able to, and there were some missteps along the way, as you would expect. There was great pressure to find somebody, and there were missteps that were taken. But I think overall we learned a great deal about how to cooperate and the value of cooperation in law enforcement. I also thought that kind of on a side note, we made great progress in, we resisted releasing all of the photographs The press sought them, the media sought them, both the legitimate media and some media was not so well intended. And we fought very hard in the courts to keep the idea that family has privacy rights in the remains of their children and their loved ones. And later that resulted in the Dale Earnhardt bill, which was passed and has been followed in many states. So I do think that victims also were given a kind of a new level of protection. The other thing is, I thought that it was one of the first times where we had victims that, because we had entered a new age of victims advocacy, and so victims played a very big role in terms of being able to speak out and to speak to the court, talk to the court, and participate in, frankly, the final decisions. I know that in the Idaho case, they made a different decision, but in my case, in our case, I never felt that anything other than the death penalty was on the table. It just couldn't be. Proportionality is the idea of, okay, I have to compare this case to things that I'm going to do in the future, or I may do in the future. I don't know what evidence they had.
What a great point, Rod. I want to play.
I just felt.
Go ahead.
If you didn't do the death, I just feel like if a serial killer is not the person that you execute, then what's your standard for the person that you would execute? So that was an easy decision.
Yeah.
I don't mean it was following the laws. I thought it had to be interpreted and followed.
Right. If your state has the death penalty, like, if not the serial killer, then who, right? Great point, Rod. I want to take a listen because, Jeremy, we're going to take a listen to some of the students and the investigators from back then in the moment telling us what they were feeling.
I'm just freaked out. I can't believe it happened in my own complex. I can't believe it happened anywhere.
Very nervous. It's scared. Thing is, in my apartment, the 4 girls. All 4 of us are brown hair, petite girls. All 4 of us have moved out of our apartment and are living with my roommate's parents in Ocala.
I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm not waiting for another body to show up.
School is hard enough to think about all the classes you have to take, and to have to worry about some maniac at the same time is just too much.
My mom called me this morning and told me to come home now.
And I'm hoping that they discover who's doing this by the weekend. And if that's not the case, then I'm going to bring my daughter home till this is solved.
Gainesville is just turning into a city of terror.
We had a serial murder. We had 40,000 potential victims. He was loose in Gainesville, and he was bent on killing.
By Wednesday, Gainesville's in pretty much a state of panic. You couldn't walk around Southwest Gainesville without being stopped and questioned as to your activities, where you were going.
So, Jeremy, I can't imagine what everyone was going through, but looking back at it now, having been on the campus, and, you know, college is such a great time to do so many things and meet great friends and get ready for life. How big of a part of your college memories really is taken up by this case and this killer and what happened to those poor victims?
It's a huge part of my life, and I don't think I realized how much of a long-term effect it had on my life until a little later. And especially now, because true crime has become such a massive genre, whenever I hear stories that take place on college campuses, it always takes me right back to that time. And I still have that feeling, you know, if I'm walking on the street alone late at night and I hear something behind me, I still get that, like, my heart will start racing. And I think it can be tied directly back to that experience, because it was the first time that I really had to face something like this. And I think it was the same way for a lot of other students, because it's a time, you know, we're there in college to learn, but we're also there to have a good time, to hang out with our friends. And to be given this heavy dose of reality right in the middle of that experience is obviously going to have long-term ramifications. And to this day, I can still see I remember when the police released the first sketch of the suspect, and I can see that face so clearly, and I still see it in my dreams sometimes when I close my eyes at night. So that just shows you how this experience lives with you for so many years.
Jeremy Helliger, appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you so much. Rod Smith, great to see you. Incredible work in this case. It's never easy. I know how tough prosecuting is, but a case like this, amazing job. Thanks so much, Rod. Great to catch up with you. Up next, was BK inspired by Danny Rowling?
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Their killer is locked up for life, but now for the first time we're learning about the public evidence and getting new insight into this monster. Here's the story. In the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, horror struck when 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were savagely murdered in their own home. The killer stalked them, moving silently through the dark, armed with a fixed blade knife. The brutality was staggering. Multiple stab wounds, blood seeping across bedroom floors, and signs of a frenzied attack. Where does this evil come from? The killer studied criminology. Who was he interested in? Was it the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, or maybe the Gainesville Ripper, Danny Rowling, both notorious for killing female college students? The killer has admitted to his crimes, but has never admitted his motive. And we've been talking about Danny Rowling, one of the serial killers that was researched by BK. So let's go back in time to that trial and listen to Rod Smith, he was just on the program, give part of his closing argument.
He's got life sentences that he's facing in Ocala, life sentences that he's facing in Hillsborough County. This case is about what he ought to pay for these crimes. Because as bad as that life of violence is, as bad as those judgments are for what he's done before he ever got here, they pale in comparison to what he did in Gainesville, to what he did to Sonia, to what he did to Christina and Krista and Tracy and Manuel. Prison's simply not enough.
He was evil. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Was BK inspired by Danny Rowling? Was this the motivation, the inspiration, this particular killer? Joining us to help answer that question, clinical and forensic psychologist and author of The New Evil, Dr. Gary Brucato is with us. Also joining us, news director, reporter, and storyteller from EastIdahoNews.com, Nate Eaton with us. Great to have you both here. I just wanted to go through some of the similarities that seemed obvious, but I want to kind of put them out there for everyone. We begin that the victims, both of these killers killed college students, mainly young women. Then we look at, you know, what were the killers outfitted with, and this was kind of eerie. You take a look, as a knife, mask, and gloves, but it's the same K-bar knife that was used. Similar masks were used. Breaking in, they both broke into residences to commit their murders in college towns. Both ended up pleading guilty in these cases. The Gainesville Ripper, though, there was a trial for whether or not he should get the death penalty. BK got a plea deal, and then in the investigation and the prosecution, it was DNA. That was some of the key evidence in both cases. Nate, so when we look at this, Nate Eaton, BK was researching serial killers. It's come to light that Rowling was one of them, but we don't know how many and to what extent yet, do we?
We don't know how many, but we know that he liked Ted Bundy, and there's that photo that came out, I believe, after the trial or right before, or after the plea agreement, of him wearing that hoodie, matching a photo similar to Ted Bundy. And he had been also listening to true crime podcasts, reportedly, and he was obsessed with this type of material. Obviously, he was a student studying this type of thing. The other interesting thing, Vinnie, to me is you had Rowling, who was linked to previous homicides that you talked about earlier on in the show, and maybe had some sort of stalking type of behaviors. Bryan Kohberger visited that home, or at least the area of the home, some 24 times in the months leading up to the killing. So in a way, was he stalking somebody there? As you mentioned, he hasn't said the motive. He hasn't said the 100% connection between him and the people that were in that home. But there's another similarity between these two.
Let me ask you, Dr. Gary Brucato, you know, the one thing that struck me was the K-bar knife, like the same exact knife. Now, I don't know how common it is for killers to choose a knife like this, but what are your thoughts? I know you've taken a lot of time to really take a close look at this, about whether or not Danny Rowling, the Gainesville Ripper, provided the inspiration or part of the inspiration for BK.
Well, I think there's something else that's important to realize that Danny Rowling had in common with Kohberger, which was an admiration for Bundy. When Danny Rowling was asked in the early 1990s about his motive, his answer was that he wanted to be infamous like Ted Bundy. And realizing that Rowling also was sort of impersonating Bundy is very important, because then the question becomes, what do these two killers that were both being studied by the same individual have in common? Both targeted following rejections by women that they idealized. Both began targeting women who emblematized the women that they were unable to attain, and committed home invasions that involved females that were young and attractive. And interestingly, both Rowling and Bundy were necrophiles. That's very interesting when we realized that the pornography that was found that Kohberger was viewing did include things like sleeping women and drugged women. So we get the sense of an individual who is attracted to the idea, and to offenders who are attracted to the idea, of taking advantage of a person who is sleeping or knocked out or bludgeoned or dead, so that you have total control over them. That weapon choice, incidentally, the K-bar, is fascinating because it's a weapon of war. And one of the points I've been making recently is that I think that's how Kohberger saw himself, as in war against the entire female sex. Anyone who happened to be of the female sex was like wearing the uniform of that team, and therefore was his enemy. And I think he saw himself as kind of delivering a blow to the women of the world. When we realized that these two serial killers had sexual motivations and hated women, it doesn't seem to be too far of a leap to start to speculate about what Kohberger was probably impersonating.
And Nate, you look at Bundy and Rowling, obviously the similarities in going at colleges, universities, and that's exactly where BK ends up, right? The difference is, I guess, Bundy was up in that area of the country, right? So he started in that area of the country, Washington State, ended up down in Florida. I'm wondering if BK would have ended up in Florida eventually if he didn't get caught.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, Bundy did, travel up in that area, made his way across the country. Would Kohberger have returned to the university after the winter break? He obviously went home to Pennsylvania where he was arrested, but had they not caught him, it makes you wonder if he was planning his next move to go back to school, maybe target some other young women, or along his way back to the university, done it in some other state. If he was fascinated with these two men, Bundy, Rowling, other serial killers, it makes you wonder if he would have acted again, as both of these men did before they were caught.
All right, our guests are going to stay with us. Still to come, Will BK ever do an in-depth sit-down interview?
With respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
That's when I went ahead and swung the door wide to my mind, to the force that I call Gemini, which is a demon. It's a real demon. It's not just a demon that has tormented me. I'm sure that it's a demon that has tormented other people as well.
That's the Gainesville Ripper, Danny Rowling, speaking to Court TV while in prison after his convictions. I want to play a larger piece of that interview as we get a little more insight into one of the killers that BK was researching.
I'm just a human being like anybody else. I mean, we're all capable of terrible mistakes and being led astray from a path, from a good path. I once was on a good path. Happiest days in my life was when I was in church driving the Sunday school bus. If I stayed in church, I wouldn't be here now. I'd give both my arms if I could do it all different, and not just because I'm sitting on death row. It's not a nice place to be, and you got a lot of time to think about things. But so I get to thinking about, I can't even fathom the amount of, pain and suffering I've caused people, man. And I get off of my cell, and it weighs pretty heavy on me. But I can't change it. If I could, I would. I'm stuck with what I got. It didn't happen overnight. I didn't just up one day marry and decide to be a serial killer. I didn't just up one day and say, okay, Danny, you're gonna be a serial killer. No. Lucifer, he was at me for a long time, knocking on the door to my mind. It was first one thing and then another.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the killings? Will you talk about the killings?
It's in the book, ma'am. I don't like talking about that. That's suffering. That's human suffering. That's real human suffering. I don't want to talk about the suffering of those dear people, man. I'm ashamed of that. I wished it had never happened.
So Rowling did an interview, and that brings us to the next question in our investigation as we compare these two cases, these two men. Will BK ever do an in-depth sit-down interview? Will that moment ever happen? Still with us, helping us with our investigation, Dr. Gary Brucato and Nate Eaton. Dr. Gary Brucato, what are your thoughts? Do you think he will want to do it?
Well, first of all, watching that clip of Danny Rowling it sickens me, because Danny Rowling exemplified that sort of slick, phony, I've had a religious conversion and my heart has changed story that you sometimes get, I can't talk about the murders and so forth, with these people that are actually relishing the attention and are trying to manipulate who they're talking to. I think that in a sort of similar vein to what Bundy also did, what you're probably going to see is eventually wanting to talk and wanting attention while also maintaining a high degree of control, so that the stories will be altered to sort of bring it more in line with his own fantasies, the way he wants to be seen, and to hold information back and to just fabricate things. This is the same person who said in a bold-faced way that he was out stargazing when he had committed a quadruple homicide that any idiot could tell was a made-up story, and thought people believed it. So you could just imagine the kind of nonsense stories that you would get that he'd be sitting there thinking you believed. That would be similarly ridiculous. I think that inability to tell, to read the room, that people could feel how silly your story is, comes from a lack of empathy and not being able to feel that. So I think I'd just expect a lot of these kind of fantasy stories, silly stories that I'm not really sure I would believe virtually anything he said, but I do expect that he'll eventually want to yap.
Nate, you interviewed a different type of mass serial killer, Lori Daybell. What are your thoughts about BK? For you, how would that interview be different? Would your approach be a little different if he said, hey, I want to sit down and talk to Nate?
Yeah, I think it would be completely different. I don't think that he has a different type of personality compared to Lori Daybell. Lori loves to talk. She loves to be the center of attention. I don't necessarily see those characteristics in Bryan Kohberger. However, it took Lori Vallow 5 years to sit down and do an interview. It may take Bryan Kohberger 5 years to do the same. There is a bit of a challenge, though. In Idaho, up until now, they rarely allow cameras into the prisons. It has to be extraordinary circumstances, and there has to be a lot of red tape that you go through. And that could change if, there's a new director appointed or whatever. So it would be logistically might be challenging. That being said, you could do it on a tablet. If Bryan Kohberger has a tablet, he could do it through letters. He could do it through phone calls. And it would be interesting to see if he is in there right now, writing things down, planning out what he wants to say. I think looking at the past of Rowling, of Bundy, I think he will want to speak one day.
Dr. Gary Buccato, do you see any value in hearing from him?
Well, I think it's always important for people like me who study these individuals for the purpose of trying to prevent more victims to understand how these people operate. But it takes a certain skill set to divvy up the parts that are valuable and the parts that are being done to self-aggrandize and lie and manipulate. And that's why I think this kind of person, you have to send in somebody with a mixture of clinical skill and forensic skill who is going to look right through that and sort of try to see how even in some of these lies, the person will reveal some truths about the motive. But I think once we start seeing that somebody has been meticulously studying offenders that have similarities, it becomes more and more and more obvious that he probably was motivated in a similar way. And if I went in there to interview him and he was avoiding discussing things that matched that made it sound like there was some other kind of story to it, it would become clear right away that he was simply not being open. Because you don't study those types of offenders who have sexualized perverse defenses and abused bodies and so forth if you have some garden variety motive that is not psychosexual in nature. And if he was not going to talk about that, there wouldn't be much value.
And we only have about 20 seconds left here. Go ahead, Nate. Finish us up.
I was going to ask you, do you think he'll do an interview?
Asking me, Dr. Mercado, or Vinnie?
Oh, asking Vinnie.
Do I think he'll do an interview? I think eventually. But I'm not sure if he's going to do it with someone like us. I think it's more like he's going to do an interview with someone like Gary Buccato because of his background and his interest in all this. Thank you both for joining us. Great to see you, Dr. Gary Buccato and Nate Eaton, two of the best folks. Wow. All right. One of the frustrating parts of this case is the lack of definitive answers to so many of the questions that still linger. Questions about why and how. And the question I have is why prosecutors didn't attempt to get those answers by compelling the defendant to provide a proffer as a condition of his very generous plea deal. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.